Okay, hi all, I'm Tim, and tonight we're going to talk primarily about the points of sail. And the points of sail refer to the different directions, the names of the different directions you're sailing in when the boat is pointing up against the wind or across the wind or downwind. And the main reason I wanted to do this, or I was inspired to do this, I was out in the boat once, and the helm said, when we go past Mutton there or something, we'll reach over somewhere else. And I saw somebody on the crew looking blank at what does reach mean. And I suppose sailing, like any other hobby or profession, has its own sets of terminology, be it baking or brain surgery. And there's a set of terms that people who are in the profession know and that are second nature to them, and the people outside that hobby or group don't know them, and it sounds alien. And once you know the terminology, stuff makes an awful lot more sense, and it's just easier to be on a boat and to understand what's going on. And that's one of the reasons you're here, is just to improve your understanding so you can have more fun and take part better. So I'm going to concentrate really on points of sail, but quickly I'll just summarise what I'm going to do. I'll talk about how we handle the sails, the direction, the setting of the sails at the different points of sail. Also the turning manoeuvres when we're sailing across the wind, sailing upwind or sailing downwind. How we turn the boat is quite different. And depending on how much time we have at the end, I might talk a little bit about sailing in light winds and just review the terminology. The reason I might talk about light winds if we have time is that things are a little bit different. I'll say some things here, you should, this is what you should do. And if somebody else is saying that, no, you don't do that in light winds, it's different, and it is. So there's always gotchas or different ways around. So I'll just start off with the points of sail, and I just did this in advance here. So on the blackboard here, the top of the blackboard is where the wind is coming from. So the blue arrow there, there's the wind pointing down, and again, it might be coming from the east or the west, whatever like that, but it's easier on the diagram to have it coming down from the top. And this area in the middle here, this sort of 45 degrees off here, is typically referred to as the no-go zone. Read that? Because you can't sail into that direction at all. And the angle off the wind here that relates to it is typically 45 degrees. On a really modern racing boat, that could be down to 30. On the hooker, it might be closer to 50 or even 55. And basically, it's hard to sail upwind, and I'll actually spend most of the talk talking about that, because it's kind of magic that you can't sail upwind at all. And so, in this direction here, when we're sailing upwind, the sails are quite tight into the boat, and that position is called close hold or beating. When you're sailing a course in that direction, the course is referred to as what you're doing is beating, but the position of the boat is close hold. And I'll come to some of the finer details and the other ones in between ones. When you're sailing across the wind like this, sails, so the wind is at, sorry, when you're sailing across the wind, the wind is hitting the boat on the beam, on the side of the boat. The side of the boat is called the beam. And the, sorry, let's just pause there a second. The boat is sailing at right angles to the wind, and you have the sails typically set at around 45 degrees to the wind, and that position is called a beam reach, or it might just be called reaching. But anywhere in between the close hold and, say, that position there, is some form of reaching. So you might, in here, you're on a narrow reach, and down here, you're on a broad reach. And up here, the sails are, you'll let out a bit here, and down here, you'll let out even more, but you're still on some form of reach here, okay? In this kind of zone here, anywhere off a broad reach, and the same applies up on this side of the world over here. And when you're in this bit down here, up here is called the no-go zone. Sometimes this area down here is refer to as don't go zone because you're running before the wind. And when you're running straight in front of the wind like this, you might have sails out on both sides, which is called goose winged, or you may have them out only on one side. If you're just off the wind a little bit here, where you're still running, but it's not a dead run. Dead run is when you're exactly in the same direction as the wind. You will have sails out on both sides. Sorry, I drew a bad angle there. They're probably nearly out perpendicular to the boat. There's a little, you'll have a little pulled in moving in this direction, fully out here. And as you move from that position here to this position here, what happens is the sail that's lured of the wind gets blocked by the mainsail. So your jib or your staysail, if you have both of them up, will be fluttering because they're getting blanketed by the big mainsail that's sticking out there. So quite often on a boat like a hooker, they'll pull out the staysail, they'll stick long wooden pole into it and they'll hold it out there and it'll catch the wind. And I'll go into those in more detail later. But I just kind of amusingly, the reason they call this the don't go zone or the shouldn't go zone is in this area here, turns from one direction of the wind to the other are called jibes. And when you're turning upwind from here to here, they're called tacks. And tacks are a lot more safer. I'll get into that in a bit more detail when I talk about turning through the wind. But just kind of get your mind thinking about them. Everybody been here? Anybody here not been out of the boat yet? Okay, so have you been on any boat? No. Okay, but when you're turning upwind from say that position to this position over here, it's called a tack. And it might seem when you're doing it, it's quite hair raising, but it's quite a safe manoeuvre. When you're turning downwind from say that position here to this position over here, or even broad reach from one side to a broad reach, I'm not sure why you want to do that, where you're going, but it's called a jibe. And the sail, the mainsail that's out, that has a big boom, there's a boom here, just needs a bit more sanding. That big piece of wood is going to go all the way perpendicular to both on one side and the other side, and that's a fairly savage movement. And if you do it accidentally, it's called a crash jibe. Things can break, like booms or masts or heads, and it is frightening. So you need to be quite careful in this zone here. Where up here, there's lots of noise and lots of wind, but tacking actually is quite safe. And so this is the no-go zone, and this is sometimes referred to as the don't-go zone. But sometimes you will go here, but you need to be a lot more careful.
Tim, if you're in a following wind,
yeah,
will it tend to push the bow down?
Yes, because indeed. Thanks
you're going to get left and right. You're going to go left or right.
Yes.
The opposite direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have this big bang wind out in front of you that's pulling the boat forward, but also down into the water. So in those situations, the crew will move backwards on the boat. And remind me of that when I'm talking about the turning and stuff and the operating of the sails. Because positioning yourself on the boat is important. Some boats probably, on the hooker, the main thing that probably means is you wouldn't be sailing as efficiently as possible. But on some boats it's quite easy to pitch pull, where just the nose dives in. It quite happens a lot on catamarans. They just dive into the water and the crew will fly up in the air and the boat somersaults around. It's very scary. So again, up here, where one of the key things I want to talk about is sailing upwind. I assume everybody in this, it's kind of magical, the fact that you can sail upwind at all. The square riggers, these big traditional boats you see in old-fashioned movies and stuff like that, with lots and lots of big sails, they're called square rigged because the sails are square to the boat, they're perpendicular to the wind. They would only sail down in this zone down here, and they had to wait for the wind to go in the right direction to move where they wanted to. And they could sail a little bit off to the side, to either side, but primarily down here. And you might have heard the term trade winds. So these boats, most of the Earth's surface is covered in water, and boats were primarily used in moving goods and armies around the world. And in moving goods, you're trading, and if they wanted to bring stuff from Europe or British Empire down to the Caribbean and bring back spices, you waited for the wind to blow in your direction, and you waited for it turn around. And winds are seasonal, they shift a lot. I know in kind of October in the Atlantic, you get a lot of storms, and then moving November, December, you get kind of southerly and westerly winds, so it's very easy to move from Europe across the United States or to the Southern Americas, and that's for trade winds, and their trade routes, they're well known and stuff like that. So it's only modern boats that can sail upwind because they have fore and aft rigs, so instead of having big square sail configurations, they have a sail in the front, or multiple sails in the front. They have, like a hooker has a jib and a staysail, and then a main sail, that's the power. The sail in front actually allows you to turn into the wind, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on there when that happens. I mean, I assume everybody in this room is probably riding a bike, yeah? And if you're riding a bike down in this direction here where you're running, sailing, what's it like? Is it hard or is it easy? Anybody?
Like the wind behind you?
No, the wind's behind you. You're on your bike. It's really easy, yeah. And if you're on your bike and you're cycling into the wind, it's hard, you know, head down, you know. And if you stop pedaling when you're pedaling upwind, you fall off. You're not going to. That's definitely a no-go zone on the bike. But over here, where I'm drawn, where we're close hauled and we're beating, and everybody's been out in the boat, has been in this position here, the boat's heeled over, it's quite exciting, and you're sailing upwind. You know, if you're pedaling in that direction and you stop pedaling, you'll still fall off. There's no way. Your bike isn't a boat or an airplane, and it can't actually freewheel upwind. Can't even freewheel across the wind. You have to be in this zone down here on your bike to get any kind of positive push out of the wind. If you're turning into the wind at all, and anybody who's cycled home after a long day or whatever like that, you know that feeling. You turn into the wind a little bit. Oh Jesus, you know. You know, it's hard. So sailing upwind is kind of special, and I talk a little bit about that. I call this class just points of sailing, but Bella always refers to it as physics of sailing, and this is a little bit of physics. When you're sailing upwind, so that's your wind here, and this is your boat, and that's your sail. And I'll probably even tighter than that, and it might be like that. It's hard to draw them accurately here because lousy chalk. You always need a bit of a belly in the sail to get it moving. But when you're sailing as close to the wind as possible, you'll have the sails in quite tight. And I'm just going to draw the sail here. So that's your wind there, and our boat, and this is our sail. Okay, just rub out the boat there for a second. Sorry. The wind hits the sail. You can see there, Gina.
Yes.
And okay, the sail is set here in a configuration where we're sailing closely hauled, we're sailing beating, we're sailing upwind. The wind is going to go across the sail like that. If the sail is set correctly, I think I'll do it in a different colour. So we got blue wind, and it comes around the sail like that, and around the front of the sail like that. Okay? So it splits, and you know when you've been out on a boat, you see the sail has this lovely tension shape. It's not fluttering at all, there's pressure in it all the time. And the wind that's coming, so this is the inside of the boat, okay? The wind that's coming around this side here has to go a shorter distance than the wind that's going around the outside. So this has got higher pressure, and this has got lower pressure, okay? Just because of the shape of the sail. And sail manufacturers go to a huge amount of work, especially on expensive racing boats, to do things to the sail to make them hold the shape. If they could, they'd prefer the sails to be made of solid material, like aluminium or some kind of things like that. And in fact, the fabric they have in these modern racing sails is kind of 3D technology in it. It actually holds that shape. But sails have battens, they have all sorts of things to make them hold that shape. unfortunately, a sail has to go over the other side, and the angle of that curve needs to change, so that's why they need to be flexible material. But this pressure differential between the high pressure and the low pressure is what actually makes you sail upwind. And if you think of, say, an airplane and it's charging down the runway, and it starts off at 2 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, 250 miles an hour, and he shaped the flaps on the wing. He's doing exactly the same thing on that. And when he gets to enough speed, the pressure differential between the under edge of the sail, which is high pressure because of the shape of the wing, and the top of the wing, which is low pressure because of the shape of the wing, is so great it lifts that plane off the ground. And, no more than your ability to freewheel upwind. Planes, the weight of them just intuitively shouldn't be able to float up into the sky, and they don't float into the sky. They lift, and they lift because of that pressure of the wind. Now, in a boat, our wing is at a completely different angle, like it's 90 degrees rotated from that of the plane. And the force that gives us is actually a force so our wind is up here in the blue, and the force it gives us force in two directions. One, upwind, about 45 degrees to the wind, and you might hear sailors talking about, we've got a great lift there, we've got lift. And that lift is what gives you the ability to sail upwind. But it also, I can't draw in 3 dimensions here, I'm not good at this, but it also gives you a force kind of over, which is why the boat keels over. So anybody who's been beating or sailing upwind, when you go through the tack and the wind fills the sail and you're moving nicely, but you're heeled over, and that's because the other direction that force is pushing you into the water. And that's why it's a good idea in moderate to strong winds. You sit on the high side of the boat, because for a number of reasons you don't want the boat going fully vertical or even close to it, because boats are designed to have their hull on the waterline, and the more it's like that, the less efficient she's sailing. So to get her back down into the water, you won't get her down flat, but the more you kind of sail on the high edge of the boat, the more you bring her down to the water, and she'll sail better. And also, as she's up like that, the windward gunnel is very low to the water, and you're taking water in, and you don't want to be doing that either. So you sit high on the boat. But in this point of sailing, when you're sailing upwind, and especially at a beat or close hold, you're sailing like an airplane. It's lift that's actually giving you propulsion, and it's quite amazing. As I said, these square riggers in the trade days, they weren't able to sail upwind at all, and it was in pirate boats. I might have said this before to some of you. Early pirate boats had forward and aft sails, and they had jibs that would allow them to sail close to the wind. And it's more the jib that helps you do this. And I probably know a bit for my going to my historical expression, but you may have heard the expression that I don't like the cut of his jib. And it would be kind of said just casually, where maybe the daughter of the bank manager brings home the boyfriend and he's got a piercing and a tattoo or something, and the snobby father says, I don't like the cut of his jib, But it actually came from the guy up in when they climbed the mast? What's that?
Crow's nest?
The crow's nest.
Crow's nest, thanks very much. The crow's nest with the telescope there. He's looking, over the horizon, and he sees a boat with a funny looking jib. And he says, I don't like the cut of his jib, because it means he's probably going to overtake us. We can't run ahead of him, and he'll overtake us, and it could mean your death is kind of imminent. So it wasn't good news when you heard the expression, I don't like the cut of his jib. But it's the cut of forward and aft jib sails that allow you to sail upwind. And I'll go back to my general purpose diagram here. When you're sailing anywhere, sort of any of the reach configurations or close haul or beating, your sail is acting like a wing. When you're sailing downwind here, it's more like a parachute than a wing. It's just a bag that's full of air, and the air is blowing into it and pulling the boat along. And as you said earlier, Mike, sailing upwind, you want to trim the boat by sitting on the high end to try and bring her down flat. When you're sailing downwind, there's going to be a tendency for the nose to go into the water, so you want crew to move back. Another thing when you're moving on a boat, it's always good to move gently. Don't go mad or go rushing back, because any sudden change in the surface contact of the boat's hull with the water is going to slow it down. So you want to do that carefully. So again, just to summarise, no-go zone, be careful zone. I wouldn't call it the don't-go zone, but the careful zone. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the turns. You're beating, and I guess one final thing to say about beating is, if you're here, right, and you want to go there, you're going to have to follow a zigzag track. You're aware of that, and that operational sail is called beating. So you'll sail out that way a bit, and you'll tack, which is turn to 90 degrees typically, and you'll sail this way, and you'll eventually approach your destination. And one of the interesting things about beating is that on any other point of sail, if you're, say, reaching here, let's say you're here in Salthill or Barna or something, and you want to go across to Clare, and the wind is coming from due west, you're going to be beating. You're going to be reaching, and it's going to be a nice, easy, pleasant sail across the bay with no turns, and nice and fast and comfortable too, because you're not turned over on your edge. The helm, or the guy on the stick who's driving the boat, will look either with a compass or at a landmark across the bay, and he'll see where he wants to go, and he'll point the boat that way. And if he's operating the main sheet or something else on the main sheet, they will set the sail to the optimal position, and the people on the jib and the staysail, they will set their sails to the optimal position for the boat, the direction they're sailing in. And that's true of all points of sail except when you're beating. When you're beating, you want to get as close as the wind as possible, because really you don't want to go over there. Like let's say this is you're somewhere at the Leverett Slide boat, and you want to go to Arran, and the wind is still coming in from the west. You want to go to Arran, you're going that direction. You don't want to go over to Salthill or Barna or Fergo or something, or Blackhead. You want to go to Arran, but you can't, because that's in the no-go zone. So the helm will point the boat as close as possible. Well, sorry, he won't. These guys here, especially the people on the jib, you get the jib in as hard as possible. When I say as hard as possible, you pull the sheet in. So when I say sheet, is everybody here, especially the new guys? Okay, that's good. So the sheets are the ropes that are tied onto the end of the sail. Sails are quite often on boats are triangular, and the triangle near where you're working is called the clew. And there'll be two ropes. There's an interesting thing, I'm jumping around a little bit here. If you look into a boat, it's full of ropes, and they all have a particular name once they're assigned a purpose. So it might be a halyard if it's used for pulling the sail, and the ones that trim the sails, so pull it in one direction, and they're called the sheets. So they're a little bit like accelerators in a car, but a lot more complicated. So when you're in this point of sail here, where you're trying to sail upwind, you're close hauled, the jib crew especially will get that jib in as hard as possible, which means pulling in the sheet as much as possible. Not quite so true in light winds, but typically this is true, get them in as hard as possible. And then the helm will sail the boat by pointing the boat as close to the wind as possible, just until the sail begins to misbehave. In fact, what I do, if you get rid of the high pressure lines here and stuff, if your sail is set like this and you're on a beat and the helm turns us up to the wind just too much, the wind that should be coming nicely split either side of it here, going to the blue, is actually going to, most of it's going to come this way, okay? And you start getting belly in this part of the sail here. Oops, it'll go like that, and it might rattle a bit or flutter, and people get angry and cross, start shouting at you and on the boat. But really, when you're beating, that's the helm's fault. He's gone too close to the wind. Another expression that we say, too close to the wind. So he might do that once or twice just to get a feel for where the wind is, and then he'll set his course, and he is then going to sail by the wind. So only when when you're close haul or beating, you're sailing purely by the wind. He's not sailing by his direction. Okay? And on all the rest of them, he's got a compass, or he's got a waypoint, or he's got an eyeball on a landmark or something, and he's sailing towards that, and you set your sails accordingly. But when you're sailing beating, you have the sails in as hard as possible, and then he sails according to that. And there's I would probably classify myself as a poor sailor. You're always trying to make more ground upwind here, and there's a temptation all the time to just push it up a little more to see if you can get up here a bit more. And if you do that, what happens is the boat stops. Once the wind gets into that corner of the sail, it's like somebody touching the brake on the car. The boat is slowing down, and these things are over a ton weight. And especially in light winds, if you lose momentum, you've got to come way off the wind again to get loads of wind into the sail to get it moving. So instead of getting a couple of degrees to the good up here, you're going to come off maybe 5-10 degrees over here to get her shifting again, just so you can bring her back on course. So it's something I do wrong all the time. And also the other thing people do wrong all the time, instead of sailing quite close to the wind, they'll come off at a couple of degrees to avoid doing that. But then they're going in the wrong direction. They're not making good course. So it's quite tricky, but it's the most interesting part to sail. Everything else you're seeing where you're going. Okay, any questions so far? First time? Not too bad. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is turning the boat. So it's obvious why we want to turn the boat when we're beating, because we're not going in the direction we want to go. We're going roughly upwind, but we want to get much more up that way rather than over that way. So every now and then we turn the boat, and there's a lot of probably an advanced class, but when you actually tack. But I'm going to talk about the mechanics of the tack here. When we're sailing along in the close haul position, our sails are like that. Wind is coming down here, and we're going to end up in basically we're going to go around there, okay? Everybody, most people have been on a boat that have done that maneuver. And so you're turning the boat from a position where it's sailing optimally close to the wind. And once you come off a couple of degrees more into the wind there, you're going to be in the place where the front of the sail is luffing. So I might have used that expression before. The front part of the sail that hit the part of the sail that the wind hits first is called the luff. The other edge is called the leach, for what it's worth. And if the luff is fluttering, that state is called luffing. And so once you turn into the wind a bit, the sail is going to start luffing and you've lost power. And you've got to go all the way through pretty much a 90-degree pivot to get over here. All the time the wind is pushing you down here. So it's not that's the water here. Once you start turning this way, you want everything to go smoothly, as quickly, as efficiently as possible, and to get into this position where the sails are full of wind again and you're moving upwind. If you screw up here or just do it badly, do it slowly, all the time you're in here, it's positioning for the wind to push it back down in this direction. And I've done it a couple of times, come trying to bring the boat up the river here. The winds are very, very light, and Gina's laughing there, she's been in that situation too, where you tack and you're going backwards. It's no fun, it's embarrassing. So another thing is you want to make this maneuver, on maybe smaller boats, if you're reading about tacking, like tacking a dinghy, they say slowly move the tiller to lee, and that's because you don't want to shock people or throw them out of the boat. But on a glow choke or a laugh or a hooker like that, you want to get it over pretty fast, because you want this thing to happen as quickly as possible, because they're a slow boat to tack, and so you want to get it up the wind and across the other side. When the boat's in this position, when it's upwind, the sails are like that, and there's absolutely no power on them. They're flattering that. If you don't get moved past that onto this side here, you're going to stop, and you're going to start going backwards, and again there'll be lots of shouting and people giving out on the boat. So you want to get through this quickly. And one of the things we do on slow turning boats especially, but on lots of boats, is you back the jib. It's called backing the jib to get the boat across quickly. The jib has much more turning power than the other sails. So the boat starts off in this position here. And okay, I'm not drawing a staysail here because my artwork is not great. It's hard enough to get the two sails in. So we have the two sails there. The helm or the skipper, the guy who's driving the boat, the person who's driving the boat will shout, either ready about, or ready to attack. There's lots of, I guess the traditional terminology would be ready about, and that's warning to the crew that he or she wants to turn the boat through attack. And they will check that they have all their sheets ready, and they're not daydreaming or they've lost a sheet or something like that. So they will reply ready. And once they say ready, traditionally he will say, I think it's lee's astern or lee hoy, and which means helm's a lee. So the helm's to the lee, where the helm is pushed over here, because that's the direction he's pushing the tiller to turn the boat into the wind. But typically we say, you're ready to attack, you're ready about, and then attacking. Do whatever the skipper says. It's his boat. He can make up the rules and that once it's consistent. And once he does that, he pushes the helm over. And a good way to remember too is you want to push the tiller towards the boom. But when he pushes that over there, that's going to turn the boat up into the wind. And normally, if you weren't doing anything fancy, you would just sort of relax. Did I say that? You never relax. But you would let the boat turn, and the sails would end up on the far side over here, and you trim them again. That would be kind of the lazy or the incompetent way to do it. The more kind of efficient or seaman-like way to do it is that this jib sail here will have two sheets. It has, let's draw it in colour. It's got an active sheet. Sorry, it says back in the boat that the crew is holding, and it's got a lazy sheet over there that's just lying on in the village or something. And this sheet here is keeping that sail in position full of wind. And instead of letting that sheet go and running over and getting this one, grabbing it and ready to pull it in when the boat's turned, what you do is you hang on to this sheet here. So as the boat turns up to the wind, I'll draw it in the intermediate position where it's head to wind. So, and I'm just going to draw the jib. You're still there, okay? Holding that sheet, and nothing's happening to the sail. But once this boat turns a bit more, and let's say that's your 45-degree line. When you get onto that line, you're going to be sailing again. But the boat's not there yet. It's sort of more like that. And the jib will then back, okay? So it'll have the wind coming from the wrong. It'll be inside out because your sheet is still over there. So somewhere between kind of there and there, the jib will back. And it will do that much earlier than that position there because the sheet is pulling it on the other side of the boat. So it's much closer to the wind than it would be if you're over here pulling it. Okay? And that few seconds of extra wind, extra power basically, turns you to the wind much more quickly. He'll still have the tiller over the far side, so you're still turning, you're still moving, and this backed jib will start catching this wind and push the boat around and also upwards faster. And then once you get back onto your final course, you're here. You'll pull it in on the windward sheet, okay, and the main will have followed over and that's what the sheet is in. But the important thing is to get the jib across quickly and as efficiently as possible. The other thing about tacking when you're turning upwind is, and this is true of your close reach and broad reach as well. But much more so in the close haul or beating, because your sailing is really, really close to the wind, and any stop there at all is like the handbrake coming on. When your starting position is over here, let's go through this again, and you want to turn, and this is more the helm's responsibility than the crew's responsibility. You want to make sure you have some velocity and some momentum that you're moving. If you're barely moving along here at all, and you begin to turn, if the wind is strong, you won't have enough momentum to get through the turn, and you'll just really go head to wind and start going backwards. So it's really, really important that you have velocity here, or momentum, I should say. And one of the things you might want to do is, especially in lightish winds, is to come off the wind a little bit, and it's called bearing away. So you'll go, say that's your limiting direction there. You'll come over here a little bit, and that will give you more speed, just for maybe like 5-10 seconds, and you'll notice you speed up, and then whip around. Rather than if you're what I was talking about earlier, pinching, you're a bit too close to the wind, and you're actually slowing down here, and you try and tack. That's probably momentum and tears. So you might want to come off the wind a little bit first to give yourself some momentum, and then execute the tack. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
The other thing I said about when you're beating the boat is heeled over, the wind is very noisy, so it sounds very exciting and there's a lot going on, but actually it is quite a safe point of sail. The boats don't capsize much. There's a very heavy keel in these boats. Dinghies capsize, but big boats don't. It takes an awful lot of wind to turn them up. There's many tons of stuff down in the keel to keep the stuff down in the water, and it can be a bit nerve-wracking at first, being kind of heeled over nearly in the vertical position. But you do get used to it, and you get used to it. And the boom, which is kind of out in this, that's the boom there in front of you. It's the wooden part of the end of the sail here under the main sail. It's going to go through that angle change there to there. So it's a narrow enough movement. When we're sailing downwind, so the turn upwind is called a tack, and the sail the turn downwind is called a jibe. So if we're sailing like that, and let's say there's a mark there, we want to come around us, and we want to sail in this direction. Okay? The boom here in this case is out like that. It's a big, as I said, anybody wants to lift it up there, it's a heavy piece of wood. It's going to go, in the previous scenario there where we talked about tacking the front of the boat, turn through the wind, but in this case here, the stern of the boat is going to turn through the wind. So the boat is going to end up like that afterwards, right? And the sail is out like that. And for the boom to get from here to there, it's going to go, and that's a fairly savage movement of the boom if it's done accidentally or if you're not prepared for it. You'll also be aware, anybody who's been on one of these boats, the boom is fairly low to the boat, and you think of the position of your head. So you don't want to jibe accidentally. And I won't talk about it too much here because it's something you probably need to learn on the water more, but the helm in preparing for a jibe will typically pull, even though it's not a good point of sail, you pull the boom in so that this sail here, instead of being out there, is more at that kind of angle there. And when it jibes, it'll move from that side here to just this side here. And once the jibe is complete, he'll ease at the sheet, and then that will fly out there like that, and that's a safe jibe. The difficulty, the scary thing about jibes, or what I call it area, the don't-go zone down here, when you're sailing directly downwind, the wind isn't a constant thing all the time. It's shifting. It's getting stronger. It's getting weakening. You look at the weather forecast, you'll hear wind 10 knots, gusting 16. So that means the wind's going to be blowing somewhere between 10 miles an hour, 10 nautical miles an hour, and 16 nautical miles an hour, and it's moving all the time. And it's never bang on southwesterly. It's shifting a few degrees all the time. It's very dynamic. So if you're sailing in this position here, with your sails, I'm going to draw them on the one side, just because it's easier. It's like this, and you're going on a long passage, and you might even have the sheet tied off so you can relax, and somebody's looking at the phone or reading a book or something, and the wind shifts, and the boat does that. You're going to get that movement from that side up to that side, savagely, and people aren't prepared for it. It's not pretty. So you do things that you learn this more on the water than in there, but you do things to prevent that, and you're very, very careful. Also, the helm is the responsibility here. You're very careful when you're in the situation so that you don't do that. Okay, so tacking and jibing, good. What else is I going to talk about? Okay, I said I mentioned a little bit about light winds. And just before I get into light winds, reading my sequence a little bit, some of the terminology used in sailing. When you're sailing along, and quite often when you're out on a hooker, you're going to be sailing upwind. And one of the reasons for that is that once you go downwind, you've got to fight to get back upwind. So when you're out there on Tuesday night or Thursday night or something and you're doing a training run, the helm will quite often sail upwind, so he has something to play with on the way home on the next leg. But he'll try and keep upwind to give himself some slack. So you do spend an awful lot of your time upwind. So I'll talk about that to some degree. When you're sailing upwind, and might go the diagram again, your sails should be like that, and you're not concentrating. You might have them out a bit like that because you're talking to somebody else, or your arms aren't that strong, you don't feel like pulling the rope that hard, whatever, and the sail is out like that. Or for whatever reason the sail is in the wrong position. The helm or somebody in the boat might shout at you and say, harden up that sail. So harden up the sail means pulling on the sheet. And the opposite of harden up is ease. And I guess always important, if someone tells you to ease the sheet, what they want you to do is, they're not quite sure, is the sail set optimally? They want to see, if we let this sail out a little bit into the wind, this probably isn't when you're beating, because it's very easy to know when you're optimally sailing beating, because you're either luffing or you're not, and you have to sail in as hard as possible. But if you're sailing across the wind, or maybe on a narrow reach, a bit like that, we don't have telltales on these sails. It's hard to know when it's set up. Could I let it out a little bit more? Could I bring it in a little bit more? So the helm may say to you, just ease that jib a little bit, and he will see, does it improve the motion of the boat? And if it doesn't, he might tell you to harden it up again. When you ease it, the clue is in the word ease. Do gentle movements. Don't go let out, 3 or 4 feet. Just a couple of inches, couple more inches, and gentle movements. Always when you're making changes to the sail position. You probably shouldn't be telling the helm what to do if you're a crew, but if you're a crew and say you are beating, and we're in this position here. I just say this, I'm trying to give you examples here just of terminology, because you'll hear these terms on the boat, and the sails are set like that. But you think, you're looking at the water, you're looking at the pattern of the wind on the water, and as I said before, the wind is always shifting, so it's a really good technique, especially when you're racing, if you see a shift in the wind or what you can get a lift, the wind will back and veer all the time, and you see the wind is shifting a little bit because you're looking at the pattern of the water. You might say to the helm to come up. That's the expression. Come up into the wind. It means so. Up is into the wind, and down is away from the wind. So if you hear things like "come up, come up, come up," he's telling the helm to point up into the wind a little bit more. Because if you point into the wind a little bit more, and you're still getting a good sail shape, you're making a good course. That's what you want to be. You want to be going up here all the time. You want to be going over to Clare rather than out to Arran. And so if you hear somebody saying "come up," that means point into the wind a bit more. And conversely, if somebody says "bear away," they don't quite say "go down." They say "bear away." So "bear away" means come off the wind a bit. So come up with this way a bit more. And just a little bit, and all of those things are small motions. Again, another thing you would do is in a gust, when you're beating along like this and the wind gusts. Two things: you might get people on the boat might get frightened because the boat is so heeled, and sometimes it's dangerously heeled. So, two things you can do there to these situations: one is you just ease the sheets a bit, so that will spill. That's called spilling wind. So that will depower the situation very quickly. And the other thing you can do is you can point up into the wind, or it's called luffing up. And even though I would say you shouldn't point into the wind, when it's gusting like that, you will get enough momentum to point up into the wind, and it will take it'll cure the overpowered situation, and also get you a few more feet or a few more meters in the direction you want to go. So luffing up is another thing, another term right here in the book. So luffing up, hardening up, bearing away. So they're all directional things. Sorry, I said harden up, no. Luff up or come up, and bear away. And for the sheets, operation of the sheets, it's harden up means pull them in harder, and ease means let them out a little bit. I still have it here. Read this, I don't know. No. Remember I drew this diagram where I said that this is the sail, right? And this is the wind. And it comes around the sail like this. And in the situation where we're sailing upwind, we want that sail in as hard as possible. Tight hold, close hold, put it like hell on the sheet to get it in. And the pressure of the wind will give us this shape with our high pressure here and low pressure here, and the resultant force that will make us, or called lift, that will make us sail upwind. If the winds are quite light, all bets are off. So what will happen if the winds are very light and you pull like hell? Because something you heard Tim said, when you're sailing upwind, pull like hell on the sheet. If the winds are quite light, your sail is going to be like that, and you won't get any pressure differential, and you'll stop moving. And people who win races are people who can sail well in very light winds, because they know the subtle tricks. Your life is a lot more nuanced than just the first class year. So you're like that, and you're not moving. So you do want to ease the sheet a bit in this case, right? So it's a bit more like this. And you've done that by actually letting it go a bit, because the wind isn't in, but you have to give somewhere for the wind to catch, so you'll get this pressure differential. It's also one of the cases where you might get the crew to sit on the low side, the other side of the boat, to actually cause it to heel, because you're not getting enough of that motion, and you'll pick up a bit more wind in those situations. So, in general, the working ropes, the halyards, the sheets, and both tend to want to be, under a lot of pressure, tight and strong for any kind of moderate to strong winds. But in lighter winds, you need to ease things a little bit, because if the sail is just flat, like a sheet of steel, it's not going to catch any wind. I think I've covered everything I said that to do. Any questions, anybody?
What's your, it's kind of obvious, but what, I've heard it a couple of different ways about people telling what way the wind is blowing, so using your nose and your ears.
There are lots of ways, and I start out with the ones you won't have on the hooker, but they're out there too, you should know about them. Like modern racing boats will have a wind X on top of the mast, which is a little sail, little arrow with a fin on it that catches the wind, and it spins to point in the direction of the wind. So, on a basic sailing boat, you'll have that, you'll look up and you'll see that. On a more sophisticated one, you'll have an electronic display in front of you, and it'll show you that angle, and it'll show you that angle relative to the boat. Even more, it'll tell you the speed of the wind, and the average speed of the wind, and even more, it'll tell you the apparent wind, because I probably shouldn't say this, so I don't want to confuse your heads too much, but there are two kind of winds. There's true wind and apparent wind. And true wind is the wind you feel when you're sitting on the boat at the mooring. Once you're moving, everything else is apparent. It's because it's irrelevant. It's like, back to my bicycle, if you get onto your bike and you're cycling with the wind at your back, but you're going quite fast, you'll still feel the wind on your face because you're cycling faster than the wind. That's apparent wind. So these really sophisticated gauges will tell you true wind and apparent wind, which is important in the advanced class. On a hooker, we don't have any of these. So if you face into the wind, and somebody asked this question before, and I'm sorry I didn't think to say this. When I'm driving along, I'm always looking at flags and trees, and sort of trying to look at the direction of the wind. And the prom is a great opportunity. Most people here go up and down the prom a lot. There's flags on the prom. The wind is nearly always coming from the southwest. So you look up at the sails and you can see where the sails are coming from. If the sails are going straight along the prom, it's the westerly wind, that's quite a different one. Or if it's coming from Leisureland over towards Clare, it's a northerly wind, it's a cold day. Always get in this habit of doing that. But in the absence of those flags, the most basic thing you have is you've got a pair of ears. And your brain is quite sophisticated, so your brain, if you are facing, let's say the wind's coming to you, Jonathan, and I'm facing directly into the wind, unless I have something wrong with my hearing, that wind will hit both ears at exactly the same time, and I know the wind is coming over there. And if I turn slightly this way, it's going to hit the right ear before the left wind, the left ear. And so I know that's the direction it's coming from. It's coming from more over there than, say, looking at Gina down there. So that's a really, that's a fundamental way to know how to do it. Also, on the hookers you'll see out there, you'll see people have tied little telltales, so the light strings of cotton onto the stays. So if you look at those, you'll see the direction. And again, I don't want to confuse you too much by talking about apparent wind, but apparent wind is the wind that's operational once you're sailing. So you can forget about the difference between real and apparent, or true and apparent. Once you're sailing, it's the wind that affects all of the things I've been talking about here. So if you look at the telltales on the boat, and it's good to do that, especially if you're tacking, because when you come through a tack, especially if you're back at the helm, you've ducked under the boom and you come over the side, and let's say you're way out at sea, there's no landmarks. Are we there yet? Have we turned through the thing yet? You can see the telltales, and you can see your angle relative to the wind. And actually, just reminds me of one point I made there. When you are tacking, especially if you're at the helm, it's a good thing to do to say we're sailing over here, and when we tack, we're going to be sailing in that direction over there. Just to look over there and sort of say, okay, that's going to be, say, Salt Hill Church will be on my shoulder when we go through this tack. So, when you've gone through all that excitement and ducking of the sail and lots of noise and shouting and booms going across it, you come over here and say, are we pointing at Salt Hill Church, or are we looking at Leisureland? So that you have an idea that you completed it. So do that before you do the tack. Anything else?
Just to say, I know yesterday they pushed out some of the racing, and they're saying it was gusty. In the Babel season, does the wind direction vary a lot within an hour or something like that, or was it just speed of the wind was
It
changing?
would be the speed of the wind. Yeah. The directions, you will get micro variations all the time. A couple of degrees all the time. But if you look at the weather forecasts and you see these, synoptic charts, they're fairly slow-moving affairs, and the meteorologists know. So your wind direction is going to be like, if you go in this position here, more or less perpendicular to the edge of that. They know that, and that doesn't change an awful lot until you hit one of maybe these kinks and stuff like that. So when you hear the weather forecast, it'll say backing or veering, so that'll be after a number of hours. But they're not wild changes. You might get them in a storm because you're coming through the eye of a storm and stuff like that. But under steady weather conditions, the direction of the wind would be, plus or minus a few degrees, but fairly constant. It's not going to swing around 90 degrees and back 90 degrees and back 90 degrees. The problem there is there's just too much wind. Yeah. Having said that, I'm talking about out in the open sea. If you're coming around any land masses or
the river,
big, I'm losing my language and my vocabulary. What's the bit of land that comes down and see like a spit or a mountain? You will get vortexes there, and they will be very turbulent and unpredictable. Yeah.
Do you know, Tim, last week when we were sailing over to Kinvara and we were on the other side of the lighthouse?
Yes.
I suppose the wind was starting to come pretty much from behind us because everyone then started to goose wing.
Yes. Well, once we got past town, we started goose wing. So we actually changed our course there. So to get past town there, we were beating. We were sailing upwind, and poor old Colleen got shortchanged here at Colleen Oak because you're supposed to, the course was to go around town shows, which is a lighthouse that's Wales. Yeah. It's a good bit west out, and he headed that way, but nobody else did because big key boats that might be a bit shallow in close to town. But we all went in close to it. But if we didn't make enough course upwind, we might have to tack and put an extra tack in there to avoid going into town. But once we got past town, we turned direction, and the wind we were on like either quite a broad beach or probably on the early points of running, and we were goose winged. It was great. It was a lovely sight looking at the boats in a row with sails out on the other side, and it was a nice wind too. It wasn't too powerful. It was great. Okay, listen, thanks everybody.
Thank you.